Today we're going to be installing a 3/4 inch by 4 inch wide solid oak flooring material, pre-finished. This is a kitchen area where there are some new cabinets refaced recently. I'm going to work around the appliances. I'm going to slide them out, install the flooring in the behind the stove, and slide the furnace, the stove back in over the pre-finished flooring so we don't have to take them out of the room. You can do that with pre-finished flooring. Same thing with the refrigerator. The refrigerator will be slid forward onto the new material. Then we'll install material behind it and slide the refrigerator back. I use 1/4 inch plywood to move appliances over floors like that, because even cardboard can get dents through cardboard that will go into the flooring and cause a marring on your new surface. So the first thing we have to do here is there's a little bit of prep to do underneath this cabinets that were just recently resurfaced. I have to fill in some flooring material, just a space filler there. A little bit of 1/2 inch plywood should do the trick. I have to remove the quarter round. I'm not going to remove the baseboard because we have the baseboard go all the way around this corner into the living room area, which I've got plastic off to keep the dust out of the living area. And so if I took the baseboard off and then put them down on top of the new flooring, we'd have a height difference on this corner here. It would be 3/4 of an inch higher. And so we decided we'll pop the quarter round off, and just that'll give us our expansion joint, because we need an expansion joint of about 1/4 of an inch all the way around the floor. My flooring is going to start on this wall here, and it's going to go out through this little hallway and into this breezeway area. It's not a very large job. So the first thing after I get the floor leveled up there, there's a vinyl baseboard underneath the kicker there in some places, which will have to be removed. This is a completely new cabinet here, so I didn't have it. And then we have to pop the quarter round off all the way around. And then do our layout. So I'll do all this stuff, and then I'll show you how to do the layout. So I've trimmed the bottom of the door casings here, as you can see, so that the new flooring material will slide underneath that, like so. So we get a nice finished look. I used a specialty saw for trimming door casings and toe kicks, but you can also use a Japanese saw to do this. The corners are a little bit tricky. I use an oscillating tool for those. That is this tool here. Works pretty good for getting in tight corners like that. And then I use a chisel, just a little 1/2 inch type chisel, to cut this little section here. Okay, so I've taken my measurements, and I've determined that we'll have a full piece if we start in this spot here. We'll have a full piece at the end wall, so that's good. And we'll have almost a full piece at the toe kick on the far cabinet as well, which is good. There's going to be a small sliver under this cabinet, which is not really a problem, but we'll just put that in at the end. Also, my starting piece here was a little bit challenging to do. I have a carpet edge, and I bought a a reducing strip for this flooring, which goes from 1/8 of an inch up to 3/4, so it's the same height as the finished floor. But the carpet is higher than that, so I ripped a piece off, and that's what it looked like. That's the normal piece, and I took it and I ripped a piece off of the leading edge of that, and it still didn't look quite right, so I ripped the bottom edge here. I beveled it, just the bottom, very bottom edge, so that it would fit over this piece of metal transition strip on the carpet here. And so now it looks like a nice edge, and it took a little bit of time, but it's well worth it. So I'm going to connect these two pieces of wood with a spline, which is basically a tongue. Every one of these boards has a tongue end and a groove end. And since I'm putting a groove end towards a groove end, I'm going to put a spline in between them. You can make these, I buy them, but you can make them on a table saw just to fit together like that. And I'm going to glue them in, and that'll give us a nice tight joint between these two boards here. Okay, so now I've nailed my starter piece and my reducing strip together, and as you can see, that makes for a nice transition between the carpet. In the next clip, I'll demonstrate how to nail boards together and do cut-offs. I'll be using a Boss-Stitch flooring stapler. This method involves tapping each succeeding board to the previous one, placing a staple about every 8 to 10 inches. Stagger your end joints by at least 5 to 6 inches ideally. You will staircase the floor installation as shown and cut off the end boards as demonstrated. So when doing cut-offs, I like to choose a board for the end that's close in size to the space that's being filled. And then, instead of measuring it, all you have to do is turn the board around so that the end that's being cut off is near the end of the board that was last laid, and then you mark with a pencil, put an X to know where it's going to be cut off, which side, and then you can cut it off. So I can do that 2 times here. Stack one on top of the other, and that way I cut the last one first, and the first one to be installed will be on top of the pile when I come back from the saw. So now I have my boards cut off. The first one is on top, slides right into place. Put my flooring nailer on. And so on. The next one. So I've come to a transition point in the floor where I'm going to have to do something a little different. My boards are coming out into the hallway here, so I stopped. My last board was this one here, running from left to right, where I was cutting off the tongues. And now I have to change directions here, just so that I can set my board where the direction, where the shift takes place. I want to set that board first. So I take a nice long straight board, and I set it all the way across the opening here, and I take measurements from here to the outside edge of the floor. It's where the nosing is going to be, to make sure that that's the same or as close to the same as I can get it. And as it happens, it worked out to be pretty much right on, 8 and an eighth inch. So that's great. So my layout is working out well so far. So I put this board in. I face nailed it in 3 places, 1, 2, and 3, to hold it in place. And I secured it with 2-inch staples where it connects to the rest of the floor. And then I nailed it with finish nails, 2-inch finish nails, in the concealed nailing spot on the tongue. So now that board is pretty good. I'll put one more board along here that I'll nail with finish nails, because the flooring nailer pushes the boards quite a bit. So I want to make sure I have at least 2 boards here before I start using the flooring nailer again in this spot. So now I'm going to just change directions here. I cut the tongue off at this end here so I could butt this board up against the baseboard. Now I'm going to run this single strip all the way down to the end, and then cut off the groove end at the far end there. And then I'll return to the original pattern, which is starting with the groove end up there, and then doing cutting off my tongue down here. So I've come to the point here now on the floor where I have to start using the finish nailer to nail into the tongue, but I can only nail one board here with the finish nail. The reason for this is the flooring stapler won't fit in up against the cabinets here anymore. And so I start using the finish nailer, which I've just done for one board, one row, and from here on I have to face nail on top of the board, like so. And I try to only put as many nails in as I need to, so that, because they show. So about every 12 to 15 inches or so I put a nail, and I line them up. I put them in a row so they're not willy-nilly. It makes a pattern. It's a little bit more pleasing to me, I think. And so I'll put one more board here, and then I'll have another board here, and then one. So to pull the boards together on the edge, I have a specialty tool that I use. It works pretty well. You just crank and it locks up against the flooring there, and it pulls the board in nicely. So this is how to put the last board in under a toe kick. There's your toe kick in here, and this is the last board starting here. And so what I did is I had to rip the board to get it to fit. I left my 1/4-inch gap in there, and there's going to be a toe kick plate over the inside there. And I set the board in. I nailed this board. I had to face nail this board here that I'm touching, and once it was in place, then I put the last board in and pushed it up against the toe kick so that there was a gap. Then I squeezed a nice heavy bead of wood glue down that crack, wiped it in, wiped off the excess, then pried this board back onto this one and clamped it with flat bars and some blocks. Lots of wet towels to wipe off the excess, wipe it out of the micro bevel, and just leave it there for an hour or so to dry, and you're done. So if you happen to fire a nail or a staple that doesn't go all the way in, if they're sticking out this far, they're often hard to set down with a hammer. So I usually pull them out, and I use a pair of pliers. I grip it not too tightly because I don't want to cut it off, and pry on the tongue edge there. And if it's not in there too hard, it'll come out.
Sometimes it breaks off like that because this is very hard wood. And this nail has turned around a bit actually. It's coming up through the top. So what I like to do in that case is just set the nail down, clip it off, and then bend it sideways into the groove there so it's not sticking up. So I'm moving into the breezeway area now, and this is the transition from the hallway. I had to notch out underneath the door. That's a little bit tricky. Some good basic carpentry though, and you can figure that one out. This board here is going to be the guide for starting off the first row in the new room here. So I use a nice straight board starting at this point here so that it's as long as possible going down, and I attach it to here, and then I use that as a guide for the straightness of my run going into the next room. Now on this end here I've got a nice, as you can see, the gap, the wall on the left is pretty uniform. It's looking nice. But when I measure going to the other side, it's pretty far off, which tells me that that outside wall there has moved quite a bit. So there's about an inch or so of run from one end down to the other. That there's not much we can do about that. We'll just have to deal with that when we put that last piece in. So I could do a concealed nail at this point up to about here, and then that holds this board on nice and snugly. Then I got my line looking pretty good, so I face nail in about 3 places to hold this board in place. Then I take another nice straight board and I butt it up against this one and run it down, and then I take a few more measurements to check the run, make sure everything is lining up properly, and once I'm satisfied with that, then I face nail this board in 3 places to hold it in place, and then I conceal nail it in about every 10 inches or so. And the narrower board, a 2 1/4 inch board, is going to move on you more if you do that, so I tend not to do a concealed nail on my first board. I just do a face nail with the narrower boards, but with a 4-inch board the wood doesn't move very much because it's so wide, so I can also do a concealed nail pattern. And on my second row, this one here, it's all concealed nail all the way down. So then that's my second row. This is the last piece of my second row. Going in here. Don't hit it too hard. You have to move boards. And now we've started the run for the final room. So this is the last phase of the floor. I've moved my saw over to the side of the room where the floor has already been laid. And I have my door casings cut, all cleaned up, ready to start the last step. So I've installed all the way up to the wall here. I have about an inch gap. I'll have to rip that on the table saw. I take a measurement because it's tapered, so I take a measurement at different spots and then connect the line with a straight edge and rip it manually on a table saw without a fence. Through the doorway, you can swing through the doorway, so I usually use the flooring stapler as much as possible. And through the doorway here you can swing, so up to the last board I can swing through with the flooring stapler and put the staples in there, as you can see. Now it's a high traffic area, so that's good. So we have a vinyl strip going in here now. I had to face nail these last two boards, and I lined up the nails. And now I'm going to have to do a tapered cut, about 1 inch down to 1.5 inches down there, and that'll be ripped manually on the table saw and face nailed. And sometimes you have to cut the back edge of the groove off if it's really tight to get it in there. But I think I've left enough gap. It depends on how much of a gap you're able to leave. I have a 3/4 inch quarter round going on, so I could make my gap 1/2 inch if I needed to. So I've installed the last board here. Most of this is fairly straightforward. You just have to rip the last board on the table saw, and for the most part, when the wall runs a little bit, you have to do it manually. You can't use the fence. For the last board in the doorway, it's a little bit tricky because you have to get under the door casing on both sides, and you have to be fairly close at the end. So what I do is I put one board in on the end, and then so that just goes up to the edge of the door casing. And then I have a smaller board here that I cut to go underneath the door casing. But I don't fasten that one in case I need it to move a little bit when I'm putting this middle board in. So the middle board I cut around the door casing, and then I usually have to cut the tongue and groove off the ends to get these to go down, and sometimes I even have to cut the groove off the edge of the board here, but not in this case. And then you just have to pop them in, and sometimes using a longer board for your last piece is a good idea because it'll bend a bit. So when you're trying to get it underneath this door casing, it's going to be sitting up on top of this board. So you have to tap it in. And if the board is longer, it's easier to do that. So for my last board, I make this one longer so that it'll bend a little bit when I'm tapping it under the door.